Claire never expected her quiet afternoon coffee stop to turn into something life-changing. She had just left work, tired and distracted, when she heard a familiar voice behind her say her name. She turned and there he was. Ethan. The boy she used to sit beside in art class years ago, now standing taller, his hands still marked with faint charcoal stains. He smiled the same way he used to, gentle and sure. For a moment, it felt like time had folded back on itself. They talked like old friends who had never really drifted apart. Ethan told her he had opened a small studio downtown, working on portraits to build his name as a painter. Claire listened, surprised by the calm in his voice, the confidence that had once been hidden under quiet sketches in the back of class. Then, out of nowhere, he asked her the question that changed everything. "Would you let me paint you?" At first, Claire laughed. "Paint me? Ethan, I'm not a model." "I'm not looking for one," he said quickly. "I'm trying to practice realism. I need someone who feels real, not posed." "You'd be perfect." His words caught her off guard. Claire wasn't used to being looked at that way, like someone worth studying, worth capturing. Still, the idea made her nervous. She had spent most of her adult life avoiding attention, keeping her emotions neatly tucked away. But there was something honest in Ethan's tone that disarmed her. He didn't sound like a man trying to flatter her. He sounded like an artist searching for truth. She tried to brush it off. "Ethan, I'd probably ruin your painting." "You couldn't if you tried," he said simply. "Come by my studio this weekend. Just one session. If it feels strange, you can walk out any time." His confidence left her with no real reason to refuse. So she agreed. Saturday came faster than she expected. The studio was small but full of light, its white walls covered with sketches and half-finished canvases. The smell of turpentine and coffee hung in the air. A soft instrumental song played from an old speaker in the corner. Claire hesitated at the doorway, clutching her coat like a shield. Ethan looked up from his easel, smiled, and motioned for her to come in. "Don't worry," he said, as he adjusted the light. "We'll just talk for a bit. I want you to relax." She nodded, still unsure. But as the minutes passed, the tension began to fade. He asked her about her work, her favorite books, the things that made her happy. His questions weren't shallow. They were quiet, careful, meant to draw her out. Soon, she found herself laughing, telling him things she hadn't told anyone in years. When he finally lifted his pencil and began to draw, she sat still, her heart strangely calm. He didn't direct her much, just told her to be herself. "Look out the window," he said softly. "Pretend you're waiting for something good to happen." The sound of his pencil moving across paper filled the room. Every few minutes he'd glance up, his eyes thoughtful but kind. There was no judgment in his gaze, only focus and curiosity. Claire felt seen not in a romantic way, not yet, but in a deeply human one. It was rare for anyone to look at her that closely without wanting something in return. She tried to imagine what he saw. A woman in her late 20s, maybe tired, maybe still figuring things out. Someone ordinary. But when Ethan paused, tilted his head, and smiled faintly, she wondered if he saw more. "You have this calm about you," he said after a while. "Like you're carrying too much but still standing strong." His words hit deeper than she expected. She wanted to respond but couldn't find the right words. Instead, she just looked away, pretending to study the paintbrushes on his table. When he finally put his pencil down, she exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath. "So," she asked, trying to sound casual, "did I survive your first practice session?" Ethan laughed quietly. "You did better than that." He turned the sketchbook toward her. It wasn't finished, but the likeness was undeniable. It was her, yet softer, lighter, as if he had captured something she didn't know she had left inside. Claire stared at it, speechless. "That's not me," she said finally. "It is," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "It's how I see you." For a moment, the room felt smaller, warmer. The sunlight caught the dust in the air, turning it to gold. Something inside her stirred a quiet realization that this wasn't just a painting session. It was the start of something she couldn't quite name. Ethan cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "Would you come back next week? I want to keep working on it." She should have said no. She had a job, a routine, a life that didn't include being someone's muse. But as she looked at the portrait again, she felt an ache she hadn't felt in years, an ache to be part of something beautiful, something that mattered. So she nodded. "Okay, one more session." He smiled, relieved. "Good. Bring that same look next time." "What look?" "The one you have right now," he said softly. Claire blushed, caught off guard by his honesty. She laughed to hide it, grabbed her coat, and stepped outside. The evening air was cool, and the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. As she walked home, her heart was lighter than it had been in a long time. She told herself it was just art, just helping an old friend. But deep down, she already knew something inside her had shifted, something she wasn't ready to name yet. And as Ethan watched her leave through the studio window, he whispered to himself, "She doesn't even know what she's just started." Every Saturday morning, Claire found herself walking the familiar path to Ethan's studio. What started as a one-time favor had quietly turned into a routine. She looked forward to more than she wanted to admit. The little studio above the bookstore had become their world, simple, warm, and strangely peaceful. The moment she walked in, Ethan would already be there, coffee in hand, his sleeves rolled up, a quiet smile waiting for her. Their sessions always began the same way. He'd set up his easel, she'd take her seat near the big window, and the morning light would pour in like liquid gold. At first, it felt awkward, being watched so closely. But Ethan had a way of making it feel natural. He never made her pose stiffly. Instead, he asked her to sit how she wanted, to look where her thoughts took her. "Be yourself," he'd say, and somehow, that was enough. The studio was usually quiet except for the soft sound of the brush against the canvas, or the creak of his chair as he leaned in to study her face. Sometimes he played gentle music in the background, old jazz or piano pieces that filled the silence without breaking it. They didn't talk much in the beginning, but as weeks passed, conversation started to flow easily. She told him about her job, her little apartment, her favorite books. He told her about his dream to host his first solo exhibition one day, though he said it with the shy tone of someone afraid to hope too much. One morning, as she sat watching the sunlight move across the wall, Ethan said, "You know, you don't smile much when you think no one's watching." She blinked. "Maybe I just forget to." He smiled faintly, dipping his brush in color. "You don't have to. You look more real this way." Claire didn't know how to respond to that. No one had ever told her she was beautiful in her quiet moments, the ones where she wasn't trying to be anything at all. Ethan's gaze wasn't romantic or invasive, it was honest, as if he was trying to understand her, not just capture her image. As the sessions continued, something unspoken began to grow between them. She could feel it in the air, the small pauses, the way he'd glance at her reflection in the glass when he thought she wasn't looking. There was a warmth in those silences that neither of them tried to explain. It wasn't dramatic or bold. It was soft, slow, like a song only they could hear. One afternoon, the weather turned cloudy. Rain tapped against the windows as she sat wrapped in Ethan's old grey sweater, one he'd lent her after the room got cold. The sound of rain mixed with the rhythm of his brush. After a long silence, Ethan said quietly, You make it easy to paint, Claire. She smiled without turning to look at him. That's a first. Most people tell me I'm complicated. He chuckled softly. Maybe that's why I like painting you. You make simple things feel deeper. Her heart gave a small, unexpected jolt. The way he said it steady, sincere made her chest tighten. She didn't want to read too much into his words, but the tone in his voice was different that day. Gentler, more vulnerable. When he finally showed her the painting, she stared at it for a long time. It was beautiful more than she expected. The background was blurred, soft shades of light and shadow, but her eyes stood out, calm yet filled with something she couldn't describe. It was her, but it was also something more, a version of herself she didn't know existed. I don't think I've ever looked like that, she said quietly. Ethan put down his brush and stepped beside her. That's how I see you. The words lingered between them, heavy and fragile. Claire didn't know what to say, so she smiled and looked away, pretending to adjust her scarf. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged, full of emotion they both felt, but didn't dare name. In the following weeks, they became more comfortable, more in sync. Claire would bring coffee or homemade cookies, and Ethan would tease her about being his favorite assistant. Sometimes she'd stand beside him, watching as he painted, noticing how focused he became when his hands moved across the canvas. It was almost intimate, the way he worked, gentle, patient, lost in his own world. One morning he asked, "Do you ever wonder what people would think if they saw all these portraits of you?" She laughed. "They'd probably think you're obsessed." He didn't laugh back. His eyes flicked to hers for a second, serious, almost shy. "Maybe I am." Her breath caught for a moment. She wanted to ask him what he meant, but before she could, he changed the subject, asking about her weekend plans, pretending nothing had happened. Still, his words stayed with her long after she left that day. Every session after that felt different. The air between them seemed charged, full of quiet glances and unsaid thoughts. Sometimes she'd catch him looking at her with that same deep focus, and her heart would race before she could stop it. Then one rainy afternoon, as she was getting ready to leave, he said softly, "I don't want this project to end yet." She turned to face him. "It doesn't have to." He smiled, but there was something in his eyes she didn't understand, something warm, but also afraid. "I'm just worried that if I finish, you'll stop coming." Her chest tightened. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer to the easel and looked at the newest painting, a softer, dreamier version of herself, half smiling at something unseen. It felt like a secret shared between them. Finally, she said quietly, "Then don't finish it yet." Ethan met her gaze, and for a brief second, it felt like the world outside disappeared. The rain, the noise, everything. All that remained was the faint scent of paint and the quiet thrum of something that was slowly, unmistakably, becoming love. The weeks that followed felt different for Claire. What began as a simple arrangement between two old friends had turned into something far more personal. Ethan's studio no longer felt like just an art space. It felt like a quiet world built just for them. Every canvas, every brushstroke seemed to carry pieces of their shared time. But now, instead of excitement, there was tension in the air. Something had changed. When she arrived one Saturday, Ethan wasn't his usual calm self. The studio was a mess, paint tubes scattered, brushes soaking in cloudy water, and an unfinished canvas sitting in the center of the room. He looked up when she entered, his expression heavy. "I've been stuck," he said simply. "On the painting?" she asked, setting down her bag. He nodded, rubbing his hands together. "I can't finish your last portrait. Every time I try, something feels wrong." She walked over to the canvas and pulled back the cloth covering it. The image took her breath away. It was her, but softer, more fragile, caught in a moment of quiet sadness. The brushwork was delicate yet unfinished. Her eyes in the painting seemed to be searching for something she couldn't name. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "No, it's missing something. It doesn't feel complete." Claire tilted her head. "Maybe it doesn't have to be perfect." "It's not about perfection," he said, voice low. "It's about truth." He hesitated, then looked at her in a way that made her heart beat faster. "The truth is, I haven't been painting what I see. I've been painting what I feel." His words hung in the air, thick and trembling. Claire didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there, trying to understand what he meant, though deep down, she already knew. "Ethan," she started, but he cut her off gently. "I think about you even when you're not here," he said. "Every color, every line, it all reminds me of you. But that's not what an artist is supposed to do. I shouldn't let my feelings decide what goes on the canvas." She wanted to tell him it was okay, that maybe art was supposed to come from feeling, but her voice failed her. The room was suddenly too quiet. She turned away, her hands trembling slightly. "Do you want me to stop coming?" she asked softly. Ethan's expression faltered. "No," he said too quickly. Then quieter, "But maybe I should stop before I ruin what this is." Claire felt something inside her crack. The thought of not coming to the studio, of losing the comfort of those mornings, was something she didn't want to imagine. Still, she forced a small smile and said, "Maybe you just need a break." He nodded, avoiding her eyes. "Yeah, maybe." The session ended early that day. There were no jokes, no soft music, no easy conversation. She left the studio with her heart heavy, her mind full of questions she couldn't answer. Days turned into weeks. Ethan didn't call. She told herself it was fine, that they both needed space. But the truth was she missed him, the quiet talks, the way he'd focus on her, as if the rest of the world didn't exist. Her apartment felt too silent without their Saturday mornings. One afternoon, unable to stay away any longer, Claire walked past his studio on her way home. The lights were off, but she could see his shadow moving inside. She stood there for a long moment, wondering if she should knock. But before she could decide, Ethan opened the door. "Claire," he said softly, almost like a sigh of relief. "I didn't mean to interrupt," she said quickly. "I was just passing by." He stepped aside. "You can come in." The studio looked different. The mess was gone, replaced by a strange stillness. In the corner stood a new canvas, covered with a white sheet. "What are you working on now?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "Something I probably shouldn't." She frowned. "Can I see it?" He didn't answer right away. Then slowly he lifted the cloth. Claire gasped. It was her again, but not like before. This time, the colors were darker, more emotional. Her expression was vulnerable, her eyes glistening as if caught between strength and surrender. It was raw, honest, and almost painful to look at. "Ethan, when did you paint this?" she whispered. "After you stopped coming," he said quietly. "I couldn't help it. I thought if I painted how I felt, maybe I could move on." She stared at the portrait, feeling a lump rise in her throat. "And did it work?" He shook his head slowly. "No, it only made it worse." Claire took a step closer. "Then why didn't you call me?" He met her eyes, his voice breaking slightly. "Because I didn't want to turn what we had into something selfish. You trusted me, and I—" He stopped, exhaling. "I crossed a line the moment I realized I wasn't just painting you anymore. I was falling for you." The room fell silent. Claire's heart pounded. She wanted to say something, but no words came. Everything she'd been afraid to admit was suddenly out in the open. Finally, she whispered, "You didn't cross a line, Ethan." He looked at her, confusion in his eyes. She smiled faintly, her voice trembling. "Because I fell too." The words seemed to stop time. Ethan's hand tightened around the brush he was holding, as if grounding himself. "Then why does it still feel wrong?" He murmured. "Because we both keep pretending it's only about art," she said. Neither of them moved. The air between them felt charged, delicate, like a moment that could break with one wrong breath. Claire could see everything in his eyes: hope, fear, longing. But then, just as he was about to speak, his expression changed. He stepped back, shaking his head. "I can't," he said quietly. "Not now. I don't want to lose you." Before she could respond, he turned away, his shoulders tense. Claire felt her heart sink, but she didn't push him. She understood. Sometimes love arrived too suddenly, too real, and all they could do was stand still and breathe through it. She left the studio that evening without saying goodbye, the rain falling softly around her. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't over, only paused. Waiting for the right moment to begin again. 2 months passed before Claire finally gathered the courage to return to Ethan's studio. She had told herself over and over that she was only going to check on him, to see how he was doing, but her heart knew better. Every time she walked by that street, she slowed down near the building, wondering if he was inside, still painting, still thinking about her. That morning, something in her finally gave in. She needed to see him. When she reached the studio, the door was slightly open. She paused, took a deep breath and stepped in. The familiar scent of paint and turpentine hit her immediately, flooding her with memories. Ethan turned at the sound of her footsteps. His expression froze: surprise, relief, something else she couldn't quite name. "Claire," he said softly, almost like her name was a secret he hadn't said out loud in a long time. "Hi," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "I wasn't sure if you'd still be here." "I never left," he said. There was a faint smile on his lips, but his eyes gave him away: tired, thoughtful, full of everything that had gone unsaid. She looked around. The studio was tidier now, the light softer, calmer. Canvases lined the walls, some covered, some half-finished. Then she noticed a large one in the corner, draped with a white cloth. Something about it made her chest tighten. "What's that?" she asked, pointing toward it. He hesitated, his fingers brushing the edge of the cloth. "It's the last painting I did of you," he said quietly. "After you left." Her breath caught. "Can I see it?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, with a slow exhale, he pulled off the cover. Claire's eyes widened. The painting was breathtaking. It wasn't like the others. It wasn't perfect or polished. Her hair was a little messy, her expression uncertain, her gaze soft and full of emotion. It looked like a moment caught between fear and hope. It looked real. "I finished it the night after you left," Ethan said. "I couldn't stop thinking about what I didn't say." She stepped closer, barely breathing. "What were you trying to say?" He swallowed hard. "That you changed the way I see everything. Before you, I painted to feel something. After you, I started painting because I felt something." His voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "You weren't just my model, Claire. You were my reminder that art isn't about control, it's about connection." Her eyes glistened as she looked at the painting again. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He gave a small, almost nervous laugh. "It's not, but it's honest. And that's enough." Silence filled the room, gentle but heavy. Claire turned toward him, her voice soft. "Ethan, I never stopped thinking about that day. I kept replaying everything you said. I thought maybe you regretted it. He shook his head immediately. No, I just didn't know how to handle what I felt. You trusted me, and I didn't want to ruin that. But every time I tried to paint something else, your face would find its way back onto the canvas. I realized I wasn't just missing inspiration. I was missing you. Claire's heart ached in the best and worst way. She had waited so long to hear those words, and now that they were here, she didn't know what to do with them. You could have called, she said softly. I tried, he admitted, 100 times. But I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound selfish. She stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Then just say what's real. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his eyes full of the same quiet intensity that once made her nervous. Then he said, What's real is that I fell for you while trying to paint you. What's real is that I tried to turn that feeling into art, but it turned into something I couldn't control. Claire felt tears forming, but she smiled through them. You always overthink everything, she said gently. It was never just about art for me either. He blinked, surprised. What do you mean? I didn't keep coming back because of the paintings, she said. I came back because being here with you felt like coming home. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally breaking. He took a slow step forward, then another, until they were close enough to feel the warmth between them. The air was quiet except for the faint hum of the city outside. I don't know where this goes, he said honestly, but I don't want to lose it again. Claire looked at him, her heart full. Then don't. He reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers trembling slightly. There was no rush, no dramatic moment, just a quiet understanding that what they had been circling around for months was finally real. They stood there in the golden light, surrounded by paintings that told their story without words. Claire looked around the studio and smiled softly. You know, she said, you should include this painting in your next exhibition. He laughed quietly. Only if you'll be there. I wouldn't miss it, she said. For the first time in a long while, Ethan looked at peace. I used to think art was about chasing beauty, he said, glancing at the portrait one last time. But now I think it's about finding honesty. And somehow, you became both. Claire's eyes softened. Then I guess you finally finished your masterpiece. He smiled. No. This, he gestured gently between them, is still a work in progress. Outside, the evening light began to fade, spilling orange and pink across the windows. Claire took one last look at the painting. It wasn't perfect, but it was full of truth, and maybe that was enough. As she turned back to Ethan, she realized that the art they had created together wasn't just hanging on the walls. It was alive in every word, every silence, every glance they shared. And in that quiet studio, where their story had begun with a simple request and a hesitant yes, something far deeper had taken shape. Not just love, but understanding. Not just art, but healing. Claire smiled softly and whispered, Sometimes the best things start with one small yes. Ethan nodded, his voice warm and steady. And end with something worth painting forever.